we are starting to record now. So if you have any questions that come up technically, please privately chat to Rebecca or to Leslie, who will be on in a minute also. So, and thank you to them for helping with this. This is not something I can do by myself, so really appreciate their help. And today is the 38th day of the Omer, the period between Passover and Shavuot, leaving Egypt and receiving the Torah in the desert. And it just seemed like a great time to talk about this period in the world's experience, in our personal experience, as a sort of desert experience that we're all in, leaving one thing, but not quite yet at another, and unsure of what that next step will actually be. So as a review, the first couple of weeks, just, and again, if you weren't here, don't worry about it, but just sort of for those of you who weren't here, and even for those of you who were, it's been a couple of weeks, we started off by talking about how when the people of Israel left Egypt, and Egypt metaphorically is like a hard, difficult place that I would say COVID is a good example of, and many of the other things that that we have experienced in this past year, that we've experienced as a group, as individuals, but also as a group. Leaving was not a direct route. God took us on a indirect route, because there is no direct route out of Egypt. There is, and we're seeing that now. There is no direct route out of COVID, and certainly out of the racial justice issues that we need to face. There is no like, okay, for A, B, C, we're done. Here's how we do it. You know, these like books like how to create this for, for dummies kind of thing. There is no how to do this for dummies. This is like, I hate those books. I just hate the whole idea that there is, you take these complex ideas and say, okay, here there is, A, B, C. You want to have a kid who's a mensch, who's a good person, you do A, B, and C. Like, it doesn't work that way. And the Torah acknowledges that, and I love that about the Torah. It says, the way is circuitous. And then you get to the Red Sea, and there's no way forward, and Egypt is coming from behind again. That in Egyptians, but remember we commented that the Hebrew was Egypt. Egypt, that place inside of us, it follows us. It tries to catch us again. And then we cry out, and Moses says, be quiet. And God says, why are you making so much noise, Moses? This is not a time for prayer. Get moving. And so there's this crying out, there's a silence to really listen. And then there's a stepping into the sea parts, and they sing. And singing, as we talked about, comes from a different place in the body than crying out. And there's a certain, and then they can see Egypt dead on the side. And I really point out that it doesn't say Egyptians, it says Egypt. That place inside it, we can see it dead, gone, at least for the moment, until we finish crossing. And then there's not enough water, and we complain. And then there's not enough food, and there's no food, and we complain. You have these moments where you feel like, okay, I've done it. I'm out. I'm there. And it's true. We do feel it. We feel these moments like I've made it through. And then there's the next moment. And those are the empty spaces that we also need to have in order to fully leave. It doesn't happen like, okay, we're done. We've crossed the Red Sea, everything's fine. I mean, I'm speaking metaphorically, of course, here. You cross the Red Sea and it is a peak moment, but it isn't, we're not done. And so this week, so those are the sort of big gadol, as we say in Hebrew, like as the big picture of the first 2 weeks. And now let's talk about what happens next. It takes about 3 months elapsed time between leaving Egypt and arriving at Mount Sinai. And Mount Sinai is when we receive the Ten Commandments, revelation from God, as it were, whatever whatever that is. Let's talk about that moment and how we get there and what that experience is. And that's what these next 2 weeks are. And it's really important to notice that we get this experience, this group experience of revelation in the desert, not in the promised land. We're in the desert. And there's much written about that, but I mean, I just want to drop that in there. I also want to just invite people, if you have something to say, I would be thrilled if you put things in the chat. Don't be shy. I do not want to spend this entire 50 minutes doing all the talking. So don't be shy about commenting along the way if you have something to say or a question or something I'm saying isn't clear. Please jump in. So we're going to receive revelation in the desert, at the mountain. We're going to look closely at some of these texts. And it's a group experience, which is a very unusual revelation. We have Moses gets his private revelation at the mounts at the burning bush. We get Elijah gets private revelation also at Mount Sinai. Yes, Deirdre, interesting, you're right. Is there a place to read a timeline of the events around the revelation? I find the story structure so confusing. The reason it's so confusing is because this event is beyond language. And so I remember reading chapter 19, which is a chapter right before the revelation and of Exodus, and thinking like, wait a second, who's up on the mountain? When does he go? What's going on exactly? And I thought, well, I remember thinking, well, if I understood the Hebrew, if I read it in Hebrew, it'll be clear. Let me tell you something, in Hebrew, it's less clear.
But it doesn't just happen in Exodus. I mean, the story's still going on. I mean, even today, we're hearing about what God said to Moses in Mount Sinai. Like this week's Parsha, it's like the story just like folds over and over, and then like another part of it pops out over here and there.
That's right.
And it's just, there's a lot of really weird.
Because they're trying to put into language what is beyond language. I mean, that's how I understand it. We're trying to put into language what's beyond language, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And actually, some of the commentaries say, actually, this thing that's in the Torah here, it actually happened over here.
See, that's what I think. I think it's like origami. It's like there's this big sheet of paper and it rolls out, but then like you can fold like on top of each other. And some things were actually happening at the same time, and some things were later.
That's right.
And
that's right. And that's exactly. And so, how do you talk about that? And that is, and I would throw out to us, like, how is that part of our experience today, where time? I mean, people are talking about like how time doesn't make any sense right now. And things do fold on top of each other. And we are having this group experience of time they're not really working the way we're used to it working. And
you don't know how to make plans for the future because there's so much uncertainty between now and then. And yet, in order to actually do the things you might hope to do over the summer, it sort of requires you to make all kinds of assumptions about what the future is going to be like that you don't really know.
Exactly. That's why I think this desert experience is such a great metaphor for what we're experiencing now, and it normalizes it. It's like, yes, you think this is hard to don't think it's not hard. It is hard, but we're not the first people to do it. Chava, it looked like you wanted to say something.
Well, for me, it's comforting because I read it as revelation is not one time. That in Judaism, revelation comes more than once for each of us when we're ready. So I may receive some Torah, some truth now that I think is everything, and then it will continue. So that's how I deal with it.
Yes, I think that's, and I think we're going to get to that exactly that point, Chava, as we study today. It is ongoing. And I didn't bring this particular text, but it says that the voice from Sinai is always calling out.
Right.
This is in Pirkei Avot, and a text in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers. The voice is always calling. It's just that we can't always hear it. And so what do we hear? And when do we hear it? And sometimes it's harder to hear than other times. And some of us are more open at certain times in our lives and other times in our lives, and we all hear a different voice, and it's the same voice, and that's why it's so hard to talk about it. And we're gonna get to some texts about that. So if you're ready, we can jump in and look at this text. Like as I said earlier, I'm gonna have my colleague Rebecca screen share for those people for whom it's hard to download. It's also, the text is in the chat, it's been put in the chat, and I'll put it in again if you want to download it. And if you don't want to look at screen share, you can minimize it and just look at people, which is what I'm going to do once the screen share starts. So we can start with the screen share, and I'm minimizing it, and so I can still see your faces. And thank you, Rebecca. The first text is, we're at Mount Sinai, and we're in chapter 19. If you want to really be confused, read chapter 19 of Exodus. That's the chapter before the Revelation, and it's like there's so much going on. But this particular verse, jumps out. The children of Israel, journeyed from Rephidim, which is where the battle with Amalek happened. For those of you who are familiar with that story, if you're not, don't worry about it. But they went from this particular difficult place to the wilderness of Sinai, which is a particular area in the Sinai desert. And they encamped in the wilderness, and Israel camped there opposite the mountain. All of the verbs in the Hebrew are in the plural, except the word camped. They camped. There's no really Israel camped there. The word camped is in the singular, like he camped. In Hebrew, all the verbs are they are gendered, and they're also singular or plural. And I looked this morning to see if there's any other time in the entire desert experience where the word "and he camped," like in the singular, exists. It doesn't. It's the only time. Every other time, they travel, they camp, they this, they that, in describing the people of Israel. And Rashi, who's a French 11th century rabbi, who is the go-to commentator to look at as a start if you're starting to study Torah, he comments on the fact that it's in the singular. And he says, and Israel camped there, he comments on those words, he says, as one person with one heart, but all the other encampments were with complaints and argumentation. And that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, are there moments when we're all with one heart? And I think there are moments when we do have all one heart, when there is sort of a feeling of like we're in this together kind of thing. That's all the language we heard at the beginning. We're in this together. We're in this together. And at a certain point, I'm like, we're not actually in this together. People are in this in different ways, and let's be clear about that. And but there are these fleeting moments, and this is what's so special theoretically about this moment at Sinai. We were together, but as you'll see in a minute, we were also still individuals. So the question is, how can we leave COVID and this period, this past year, together and also still as individuals, and acknowledge the really different experiences. I mean, the world is. We might here in Seattle be feeling like, oh, I can see some light. In India, they're not feeling that. The whole world is not feeling the same thing. And within the United States, not everybody's feeling the same thing. Within Seattle, within these screens, not everyone's feeling the same thing. But there's just no question about that. As we go through this chapter 19, I'm just going to pull out a couple more verses. And remember, 19, chapter 20. Here's one of these things, if you want to feel like you know Torah. Chapter 20 of Exodus, 10 Commandments. It's one of those little details. Chapter 20 of Exodus, you want the 10 Commandments, chapter 20 of Exodus. So 19 is the introduction to it. And Moses is getting instructions from God about where they should stand, what they should do. And all the people, this is 19:8, all the people answered together, again, this together business, and said, all that God has spoken, we will do. And Moses reported the words of the people to God. And then God says, yeah, but also remember, tell them this, there's this sort of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We'll do it. Yeah, but remember, here's the rules. And it's like, that kind of reminds me of what we're in. I was like, okay, I'll do it, but then I forget. Then I'll do it, but then I forget. There has to be a constant reminder. And then Moses brings the people in 1917, very famous verse, brought forth the people out of the camp to meet God. This is like a really interesting image. Like they're going to come meet God. The rabbis understand this as sort of a going to the wedding canopy, that the people of Israel and the people and the God of Israel are going to meet, and Moses is bringing them together. And they stood, the tachtit hahar in Hebrew, at the foot of the mountain. But the rabbis pick up on this and say, the foot of the mountain, literally it means tachat, underneath the mountain. What could this mean? And I'm sure many of you have seen this midrash before. I'm looking at it again. And some of these midrashim, most of these midrashim I've taught before, but I'm just seeing them anew. And I thought, is it okay to teach the same things I've looked at before? And I thought, we read the Torah every year. We don't say, oh, I read the Torah last year. I mean, because we see it anew. And I feel like we're seeing it, and I'm seeing these texts anew as we're leaving this, as we're in this period of time right now. And so this is the famous midrash, which is an interpretation. Midrash is a rabbinic interpretation, a rabbinic explanation. Interestingly, Aviva Zornberg, who's a wonderful Torah teacher, contemporary in Israel, she sees midrash as like sort of the unconscious explanation. That's just a speaking of the unconscious regarding the Torah, which is if you're interested in psychology, I think it's a really, it's a very powerful way to understand all of this. So what does this stood at the foot or under the mountain mean? Rabbi Avdimi, the son of Chama, the son of Chasa, said, and I just want to comment that, saying something in the name of somebody, in the name of somebody, in the name of somebody is a very rabbinic Jewish thing to do. And it's also might help us think about how to move forward right now. Nobody takes credit for saying something. They give credit to who they heard it from. And I remember Will Berkowitz, who's the CEO of JFS, saying to me once that one of his mentors, Howard Behar, said to him, "You can accomplish anything if you don't need the credit." And I wonder if that could help us right now. If I don't need the credit, I can support you in ways that are very different than if I need the credit. So anyway, it's not a Jewish thing to say, I said this. That is, it's you raise yourself up by quoting somebody else. Anyway, the Rabbi Avdimi, the son of Chama, the son of Chasa, said, this verse that they stood under the mountain teaches that the Holy Blessed One held the mountain over them like an overturned tub and told them, if you accept the Torah, well and good. Otherwise, I'm going to drop this mountain on you and you will be buried right here. Right? So what kind of an acceptance? And then of course they say, you go back and say, oh yeah, we'll do it. We'll take it. What kind of an acceptance is that? And it's like right now, like, here's what you got to do. When do you feel like you have no choice? And when do you feel like you're making your own choices? And you have if you do something, if you make a choice against your will, in Jewish law, you are not held to that. If I'm forced to sign something, or else I'll be tortured, or else this, or else that, that can't be in Jewish law, and I assume in American law, I don't know, Monty, you can help me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming if you're forced to sign something against your will, then that can't stand up in a court of law. Certainly can't stand up in a Jewish court of law. The question is, was it forced? Was it not forced? That's the question. But if it's proven that this was forced, it's certainly in a Jewish court of law, this could not, it cannot be legitimate. So Rabbi Acha, the son of Jacob, said, this furnishes a powerful disclaimer regarding the acceptance of Torah. Like, so did they really accept it, is the question? And Rava said, well, they did accept it willingly at the time of Ahasuerus, the Purim story, where it says in the book of Esther, the Jews ordained and took upon themselves. They ordained what they had already taken upon themselves by coercion at Sinai. So later on, we did accept it fully. But this is a very troubling idea that we sometimes, that we accept a situation because we have no choice. And if you accept a situation because you have no choice, is it real? But then we have, oh, Eileen, I see your comment. Isn't it better to get something directly from the source? Well, that's the point, Eileen. I think that you, rather than me taking credit, I acknowledge my teachers. I acknowledge where I got the information from. And that is my story. I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, what is actually mine? Okay, for all of us, what's mine, and what did I learn from someone else? And how is it that because my own ideas come because I learned things from other people? And so people often tell me, you should write more, you should write this, you should write that. And I think one of the problems for me writing is that I have no idea what are really my own ideas. I just don't, so much of what I know is, it's because I learned from others and I don't even remember. So it's every time information goes from one to another, the other adds themselves into the words. Yes, that's understood, but I don't need the credit. I think it's about getting credit that is the issue. All right, so going back to our situation, the whole group is being forced, and think about us as a society, what are we being forced into? And then, and that would have been the experience of some of the people receiving Torah. It was terrifying. But then we have in our morning liturgy a completely different description of this experience. And we say this, people who pray every day in Jewish liturgy, Jewish prayer, every morning before we say the Shema, which is our central Jewish prayer, we say this paragraph about God's love for us. God loves us is actually a very Jewish line, believe it or not. We don't say it in English, but we say it in Hebrew all the time. Ahava rabbah haftanu. You have loved us with abundant love, with exceptionally vast tenderness. It's a beautiful paragraph. And I'm just giving some key lines in it. As you taught our ancestors life-giving laws, may you show us the same grace and teach us. Torah is described here as something we receive with love. And it's a beautiful experience. God is a teacher. I love this paragraph as a teacher because it describes God. What's a loving relationship? A teaching relationship. It talks about what kind of teacher we would want our teachers to be. Someone who loves us and gives us this, helps us through love, teaching with love. It's a Torah of love. It's all about love. It's not about terror. So which one is it? Was the mountain over our head and we were terrorized into accepting it? Or was it a gift of love that we experienced with love? And I think the answer is yes. Has this period been a time of terror, or has this period been a time when we've experienced new love? New things that have been actually beautiful. I mean, we wouldn't have chosen it. I don't want to ever say like, okay, this was great because we got to experience this, time, when we didn't have to go to meetings every night. That's not what I'm talking about here. But it's like, this has been an experience that has been full of a lot of different emotions, and each person had their own experience. And I actually appreciate that our tradition gives us both this Torah of terror and this Torah of love, because it acknowledges that we don't all experience the same thing. And we can experience both at the same time, depending on how you want to read this. Margaret, yes, both. I think that's the complexity that we need to embrace at this moment and see as normal. I think one of the things I hope you're seeing that I'm trying to show in this series is that what's so difficult for us right now is normal. It's normal that it's difficult. I want to normalize it and not minimize it, right? At the same time, but sort of see it and acknowledge it. Margaret, mirrors the emotions of fear and love that we direct towards the divine. Yes, and there's always this tension of fear and love in all of Jewish texts. Is it yirah? Is it ahava? Those are the two Hebrew words that come up again and again and again. And at some point they merge, depending on which text you're studying. That these two things, they aren't separate; they become one. And but that's a class for another time. So let's go on to the next page, which is the real question that I wanted to bring up today. I'm sort of leading towards. It's the blessing of being unique and still being within community. One of the things I love about the series Shtisel, if any of you have watched this, is like a lot of people have been watching Shtisel, right? What's so beautiful about this, and if you haven't, I recommend it, because it's about a ultra-Orthodox family in Jerusalem, and it's about being unique within the community. It's not about saying, okay, I'm going to leave because I just can't deal with this anymore. It's like, no, I need the community and I need to be unique. I need to be myself. And how do we do that? And so it's not just about being in an ultra-Orthodox community, it's about being in any community. How can I both have community and be myself? Because nobody fits 100% anywhere. I always say that people are like, oh, I don't like this synagogue because of this, or I don't like that group because of this. And I was like, you know what, pick the one that you're going to just deal with it. And then, assuming that it's not, so painful that it feels abusive, but every community has their stuff. Every group has their stuff. And you know what? One of the things I miss about going to synagogue is the people that aren't my best friends. The people who show up for a Shiva minyan. They always do. This one I know that they're always going to be there for this. This one's always going to show up. This one's always going to make a meal. They're not my best friends, but I need the community, and I need to be myself. And so the services aren't, this one wishes there was more singing, this one wishes there was less singing. This one wishes we use that tune, this one wishes we use this tune. This one wishes, this one wishes that. Okay. We still need each other, right? And I don't know, how do I do that? So I think actually, I wanted to bring you a couple more texts that show that the revelation is this group experience in which individuals got to be individuals. And that goes, Chava, back to what you were talking about, the voice is always speaking. And we were all hearing it in our own way. So what does that mean? So we're going to look at this now. Here's the actual first words of the revelation, Exodus 20. Remember I told you, if you're going to take a fact away from today, facts are not what I try to teach the most, but if you take a fact away today, it's like Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments. God spoke all these words saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Now the problem with English is the words you and your can be singular or plural. You don't know what the Hebrew says. In the Hebrew, it's singular. I'm the Lord, your singular God. God is speaking like to an individual. So God is speaking to the whole people, but it says, I'm the Lord, you, personally you, God, who brought you, personally you, out of the land of Egypt. You would have expected, one might have expected, the plural you, but it's spoken you personally. And it says there were 600,000 people there. So 600,000 people heard you, right? You know what the great thing about Zoom is every person gets to be in the box right next to the speaker, right? Every person's in the front row. So I don't know where your box is, on your screen, but I can guess that on your screen, your box is next to my screen. On everybody, right? And so whoever the speaker is, you got the front row seat. So at Sinai, every person had the front row seat. Every person heard you, individual you. And there are certain interpretations that said it was so overwhelming that all they heard was the first letter. God's voice was just too great. You can't take it in, or the first word, or the first line. But they couldn't take in the whole thing. But okay, whatever. That's a different way of thinking about this. But here it's like you, every you. And in this Sikta de Rav Kahana, the next text, number 8, which was written down 5th to 7th century CE. We don't know exactly how these texts became written down. Is a great mystery that nobody has figured out. And if great scholars haven't figured it out, I'm not going to spend a lot of time worrying about it myself. But the texts are old, and the tradition is that God's voice appeared to them like one of those statues or idols that seem to have faces in every direction. 1,000 people look upon it, and it glances at each of them. Like those things that you look and everybody feels like it's looking at them. That's how it experienced it. So was the Holy Blessed One. When the Blessed One spoke, each Israelite said, God is speaking just to me. I am the Lord your God. Hashem your God isn't written in the second person plural, your plural. It's rather written in the second person singular, your singular. And according to each person, this line is a key here. According to each person's strength, would the word speak to each one. Everybody had a different experience, even though they were having a group experience. You guys aren't putting a lot of comments in the comment box, so I just want to encourage you to feel free to do that as we go. Or maybe you have nothing to say, but feel free to just comment along the way. Imagine that. 600,000 people. Again, this is a number that you can say it's a lot of people. According to some, the 600,000 is only the men. The women, were in addition, and the children in addition. So it's like we're talking a huge number of people. Again, there's a metaphorical number, but still, we're having a group experience. No other people that I'm aware of has a tradition of a group revelation. And yet, this group revelation happened individually. Aviva Zornberg commenting on, also, yes, Deirdre, thank you. We were there too. Every Jew who ever will live, including people who were going to join the Jewish people at somewhere along the line. Everyone, we were all there. That's a classic Jewish line. You're like, I think I've met you before, and it's like, can't figure out where. Oh, we met at Sinai. Right? That's the Jewish joke, right? Okay, that's where we met. Kathy writes, as a professional community organizer, this rings so true. Everyone has a different experience and brings their own truth that must be embraced. Yes, and a great community organizer or a great leader of any kind will acknowledge those individual experiences. And I know, Kathy, that's something you are an expert at. And you give people, you let people bring forth their strength, their experience, rather than saying everybody fits in this box. This is what, you all do this. It's like, no, this is who I am. that message, Madeline, this message of individual experiences within a collective certainly resonates to COVID, yes. And this is why I'm bringing this. I just feel like this is like, whoa, we're all standing at the mountain, but we're all having a different experience. I find myself not wanting to comment on the experience of COVID in a collective way, only in my personal way, because this experience is so unique. Yes, that there's such a danger in assuming that other people have had our same experience. And acknowledging that this is my experience, what was yours, is so, we're just saying this was my experience and not saying this is a COVID, this is how we're going to get out of it, by not in a healthy, in a healthier way, by not assuming anything of anybody else. Barry Gordon, it's like a Bruce Springsteen concert. Everybody has a different experience. Gotta Barry, wait, if we want a good metaphor, we got the desert or we got a Bruce Springsteen concert. I think that's I haven't been to a Bruce Springsteen concert, but so I've heard. You've been, I assume. Yes, okay. Deirdre, and with COVID, I have become really aware that people are doing, I don't know what the end of it is, doing COVID differently. Yeah, I see down there, doing COVID differently. Yeah, just listen and let it be. Yeah, that's what this text is teaching us. The most powerful group experience of the Jewish people is also an individual experience at the same time. And so this is what Aviva Zornberg says about this. If God had spoken, this is text number 9. Aviva Zornberg, we've looked at her before in previous weeks. She's a contemporary Israeli from Scotland. She's from Scotland originally, Torah teacher. She lives in Israel. If God had spoken with a single voice, it would have shattered the world. If we decided to respond to COVID in a single voice, it would shatter the, I mean, it's like, it's true, we can't do it in a single voice. The wonder of revelation consists of 600,000 different qualities of voice that are registered by each listener. One paradoxical implication is that revelation is both objective and yet fully subjective, attuned to the consciousness of each individual. But another implication, significantly different, is that the voice of God places a strain on the strength of each individual. What is registered lies at the very limit of the bearable. Like we each hear what we can hear at the limit of what we can bear. It's not like, oh, it's tailored nice and easy for each person. It's tailored to the limit of what we can experience. That's what this Pasikta of Kahanat is. It's according to each person's strength, what the words speak to each one. You get as much as you can handle and no more. And I don't know if that's true for everybody. I don't know. But I'm going to imagine that for many people during these past year, we felt like it's close to what I can bear and no more. And people, you read the news as much as you can read it, and then I can't read it anymore. Like, how far can we go? I don't know, what is it? I don't know. Is it gentle, this voice? Or does it take us to our limit and we can't go any further? And my limit might be different than your limit. Moses's limit was different than the people's limit. That's why when this whole thing was over, the 10 Commandments were over, they said, you know what, Moses, we believe you now. We believe there's a God. You go talk to God. We're going to die if we hear anymore. Like, they were literally afraid they would die. It's too much. I always love when people say, I wonder why God doesn't speak to us anymore. Well, you know what? I don't think we really want that. It's too much. And we get, again, I think this is what you were talking about, Hava. We get as much as we can bear, each one of us. It's the voice is always there. How much can we bear How much can we open up to it? Different times, the answer is different. And it's okay if people have different, I don't know if it's okay, it's not okay, it just is. People have different capacities. As we're trying to deal with these social justice issues, these racial justice issues, people are moving, hopefully, as fast as they can. Different people are moving at different paces. Can we accept that? Can we push people? But as far as they can bear, if we push them further than that, they just turn off. And re-entering, how far can we go? Maria, did you unmute so you could say something?
I unmuted because I am intrigued by the Torah that God teaches someone individually and personally cannot be grasped by anyone else. And I think here we are in a JFS call with many counselors. It's hard for me to understand if I can't grasp what another person is feeling or thinking, how can I be helpful?
I think, well, this is the next one. And I'm going to read that now because since you let us this, and this is Rabbi, the Eish Kodesh. He was the rabbi who was in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Hasidic rabbi who was in the Warsaw Ghetto. It was like Hasidim were more mystical bent than their teachings. And so he's teaching this during the Holocaust. He knows, he's seen so much death. He's aware he probably won't survive. We have his writings because he buried them with a note saying, please, if these are found, please send to my brother-in-law in Palestine. At the time, he had a brother-in-law in Palestine. And some construction worker found this container, and thank God we have his writings. But he's like saying, listen, I can teach you Torah, but there is a Torah that is yours. Every person has their own Torah. And the reason you know it's yours uniquely is because you can't explain it to anybody else. Because if you could, then it's not yours uniquely. And he even says in the same teaching, it's a much longer teaching. It's one of my favorite teachings of his. He says, Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical, the classic Jewish mystical texts, that's not a mystery. You can read it. There's a book. What's a real mystery is what you can't even write down, which goes back to what Deirdre's talking about, like, what is this? What's going on here? I don't understand it. We're talking about that which is beyond. That's so deep within us that he wants to give people permission to own their own Torah. I think what he's doing here is saying, if I don't survive, you can still have Torah. Mm-hmm. Every person has their own Torah. You have to trust yourself. And maybe what a therapist, I would love to hear if any of our therapists or anybody, I know people who are therapists who aren't necessarily working at JFS, but a therapist helps you see your own Torah.
Got it.
In this language, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Chava, you're nodding. It's like the therapist doesn't have to fully own your Torah in order for you to own your own Torah. And I use the word Torah here with very broadly, the truth that is so deep. And I'm going to comment that this teaching of the Eish Kodesh, of this number 10, the Torah that God teaches someone individually and personally cannot be grasped by anyone else, while another person, in his turn, may comprehend what the first cannot. And I would say the Hebrew, this is not a good translation. There's no may in the Hebrew. The translation would really be, the other person cannot, in his turn, does comprehend what the first one doesn't. It's not like maybe this one will get, maybe that, like each person is so unique. It's a very powerful image. Especially as I think at this moment, to acknowledge our uniqueness and to own our uniqueness and to not feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not like this one. I should be like that one. This one feels comfortable even after they're vaccinated going out. this one feels good getting a hug. This one doesn't feel good. Like I should feel good. You know, I don't know what you're going to feel. Madeline writes, interesting to think about how our tolerance for what we can bear changes. Yes, I tend to think that our tolerance increases after each previous experience, but perhaps more true is just that what we can bear is always in flux. It depends. Yes, thank you, Madeline. I think that as we're running out of time, that's a great way to end. What we can bear changes, and let's be compassionate about that for ourselves and for others, but start with ourselves. Because I think if we can do it for ourselves, it might be easier to do it for others. But I'll take that back. For some of us, it's easier to be compassionate on others than it is on ourselves. And for some of us, it's easier to be compassionate for ourselves and for others. You know, it's like, just know where we are. That's the key. And on that, yeah, doing it honestly, being awareness. I mean, all these texts could bring you a whole bunch of texts that say it's all about awareness. So we're at time, and I'm gonna read the extra comments as well. Next week, we're gonna talk about the aftermath, more on the revelation itself and what comes next and how we go into the desert further. So have a good week. Send me emails, comments. I'm always happy to hear from you, and I look forward to reading what's in the chat box that's just come in. Take care, everybody.